Okay, we are live. This is Ace Interviews. Thanks for joining me for another interview where we talk about programming. And today we will focus on search and all sorts of cool stuff in that space. And I'm excited to introduce my guest today, Jason Bosco. Jason is a software developer with more than a decade of programming experience, and his latest venture is Typesense, a lightning-fast search engine written in C++. Typesense is open source. It started as a side project, and there is a company around it that is currently being bootstrapped. Jason, welcome to the channel. I'm very happy to have you.
Hey. Yeah, thank you for having me. This is fun.
I'm very excited about your work. People on this channel have probably seen my videos I recently posted, and I plan to add some new ones. So I'm really happy you had time to join me.
Yep. This is great, and thank you for doing those videos. By the way, people have been asking us for like video tutorials. I just haven't found the time to get to them, and so I was excited when you put those out. So I really appreciate that.
I would love to learn today more about you. I think 1 hour is not enough. I think a week wouldn't be enough. But there's so much interesting stuff I would like we got into. But before we start, there's this tradition on this channel where I always ask people about their favorite games. Do you happen to play video games? And is there any like a favorite game you have?
Yeah, I mean, I used to play a lot when I was younger, but most recently, I would say I got the Google Stadia, and I've been playing Assassin's Creed. I mean, I say recently, but it's probably like 2 years now. But that's been my main thing. But before that, one of my all-time favorites is Age of Empires.
Okay. Wow.
I would say Age of Empires 1 specifically. After that, I felt like they added a little too much graphics, and it kind of didn't do it for me. So yeah, I love strategy, real-time strategy games, I would say.
So there's like this real-time aspect and also like optimization aspect, I would say, right? In this.
Yep.
So this is always the question I ask to break the ice. But given your like a background, how did you start with programming? What was like the first experience, your first programming language, and how did you get into and when into programming?
Yeah, so I started programming when I was about 11 years old, and the first programming language that I learned was C. And my dad is actually a software engineer, and he worked in the hardware space for a long time, and then switched into the website. So he sat me down and taught me C, and initially I didn't it didn't click for me. But I think once I got past the initial hump of like understanding like syntax and things like that, then I was like pretty fascinated by how I could make the computer do things that I wanted it to do, and also the quick feedback cycles that you would get and the satisfaction that gives you, I think kept me going. So started with C, then did a little bit of Java, and then and then I discovered Visual Basic at that time, and it was amazing how well documented it was at that time, where even if you run into like exceptions, it would show you what the exception is and point you to the documentation, and the documentation would have suggestions on how to fix it. So just how well put together that ecosystem was, I like that. Built like a couple of little tools for, at that time I was in high school, like some tools for my high school, like to help prepare like teacher schedules and things like that.
Did you work with Excel maybe, like connecting Visual Basic with Excel, or it was more like a just Visual?
No, it was like individual like desktop applications.
Okay.
Yeah, like you could, and I love the form designers. They used to have like just drag and drop controls, and it automatically works, and you essentially had to like plug handlers for each of the events that these components would generate. So it seemed like very intuitive. And then I did a little bit of like Flash. I stumbled on that, and I liked the fact that, again, it was point and click. I didn't do too much action script at that time. Just bare minimum to get it to do what I wanted it to do. let's see. And then I discovered, of course, I did like C++ in undergrad and things like that as part of programming. But then I discovered PHP and like the web side of the world. And I would say that
Interesting.
is what changed my mindset about what is really possible. And built a couple of apps in PHP and MySQL, and then there was this one particular multiplayer game that I was building together with my co-founder, actually. So we've known each other for more than like 15 years, I think now. So this was one of our very first projects. We built like a massively multiplayer online real-time strategy game, and we naively implemented it in PHP and MySQL first, and it was real-time. So which meant that we would keep polling for
Data.
the game state from the server, like for every single move every single player made, and that would like bring the servers to like screeching halt, and like, oh, this is not going to work. So we started researching, and that's when I stumbled on Erlang. And at that time, it was Last.fm, and I think Joe Armstrong was the one who was like being a voice in the community about how they're using Erlang at Last.fm. And so I started looking into Erlang, and I loved the completely different paradigm around functional programming at the time.
Yes.
So I started learning it, and like it was so young at that time. Erlang is a platform that even things that you assume would exist, like JSON parsing, for example, like the libraries didn't have any documentation. You just had to go through the source code and figure how things would work. And the web framework that they had in Erlang at the time was like so bare bones. So there was a lot of Stack Overflowing, and it would be cool when like some of the core members in the Erlang community would come out and answer these questions. And it actually, it worked pretty well. And I think we were able to, at that time, maybe even do, I think, maybe 300 players at the same time. I mean, it was massive for us relatively at that time to be able to support that type of concurrency. And so that was fun. So, and then I started switching to Node.js and JavaScript. This was pre-ES6, etc., like just the beginnings of Node. I used it for a while, but then it felt like there was a lot of work involved in getting the plumbing to work well together at that time. And I didn't like some of the other constructs that existed in other languages that JavaScript didn't support at that time. And then I switched over to Ruby on Rails. Well, actually, I was also working on PHP as part of my day jobs. Did a little bit of Node.js as well as part of my day jobs. And then I had the chance to switch to Ruby on Rails, and I felt like that was one framework that was well put together and not much plumbing that you had to do. You just had to focus on the business logic, and it's just works out of the box. And I appreciated that.
Sorry to interrupt, but was it around 2005, 2006?
This was around 2012, actually.
Okay.
So it was Rails 3.2 already at that time. So that's when I discovered Rails, pretty late maybe. And then I was pretty happy with Rails and did a little bit of Node.js there. Rails scaled pretty well as well. And then with Typesense is when we started writing it in C++. At that time, it was really for for high performance, low level things. There really wasn't any other alternatives. You had to C++ was the only choice, and probably touch on why C++ later on specifically for Typesense. And then I started working on like the integrations around Typesense, and that's when I rediscovered like ES6 and the modern ecosystem of JavaScript. And I actually, over time, I've come to like the ecosystem, except for the tooling of configuring your Webpack and all of these things. Once you get past that, I feel like the language is now rich enough that you can pretty much do anything that. And for the first time in many years, just last month, I've realized that I've been using so much like ES6 that I switched back to Ruby for a little bit, and I missed some of the constructs that I had gotten used to in ES6, like object destructuring and things like that Ruby doesn't have yet. So anyway, and then so that's pretty much been. Oh, and I did a tiny bit of Scala. I had to edit some package that I was using that they were using Scala. So I kind of picked up. Oh, and Python, I would say again, I was doing a little bit of ML stuff, like exploratory stuff, and I did some ML, and so it's been these days.
Pretty
I'm like,
comprehensive.
yeah,
Yeah,
these days
it's a
I
great
just look at
list.
programming languages as just means to an end. It's
Yes.
more about the problem that needs to be solved versus the language itself. And I feel like all these languages are maturing and kind of learning from each other and adding features that both of them each of them have.
Yeah,
Uh,
converging in a sense. Yeah.
exactly. So I no longer think of it as I am a X engineer. It's more of I do what it needs to get done to get the product
The
out.
best tool for the job. Absolutely.
Yep.
I was wondering before prior Typesense, have you worked a lot with C++, or it was more that Typesense was the first project that you used C++ on that scale, or in that context?
So I used only C++ in like a non-production setting, like for
Hmm.
some college stuff. But after that, it's been I didn't touch C++. And my co-founder Kishore, so he worked on some C++ things as part of his day job at one of his previous companies, and he's I'd say more up to date on like C++, modern C++, I should say.
And C++ is known for being difficult, right? And I think it's the proper reputation because it is a difficult language. Certain things are not. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's difficult in that it has a steeper learning curve, maybe initially
Hmm.
to get into all the features it supports. But I mean, once you've used it for a year or two, I think it's no different from any other language. Like, it's not
Hmm.
like a fundamentally different type of language. For example, if you take something like Erlang, which is a functional programming language, like that is like completely different mindset when you program in Erlang versus something that's more object oriented, like C++. So uh, I didn't get the sense that it's that level of like difficult. The only thing is I would say runtime wise, because you have to keep a close eye on like how you handle memory and things like that are
Hmm.
not like auto handled for you. So you'd have to keep a close eye on that. And the other thing about C++, I would say, is it has such a rich ecosystem around it. Though the community is not as vocal speaking up about how C++ is used, I'd say, I mean, C++ powers a good chunk of like the world's infrastructure, like the internet infrastructure underlying, but not many people talk about it. And I
Hmm.
think that's the main issue with C++.
Interesting.
But then the ecosystem around like community libraries is so mature that even for Typesense, like we've been able to take advantage of some battle-tested libraries out
Hmm.
there, so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. So, for example, the Raft library that we're using, that's used by Baidu in production, and they open sourced it. And like writing your own Raft library is a huge undertaking. Like
Hmm.
there's, I like learning Raft in an academic context, and then writing your own library that way is one thing. But then once you've written the library, actually running it in production is a whole other thing. That even to this day, like we are discovering some edge cases in the Baidu Raft library and have like reported upstream some issues, and they've acknowledged it. So that's the level of I feel like detail that's required to write something like this. And we're now able to take advantage of the work that Baidu did, and we're contributing back. But we're standing on the shoulders of
Yeah.
giants here. Same
All
thing
those
with
bugs are
the
ready for you.
exactly same thing with the HTTP library that we're
Hmm.
using. Like that's used by Fastly in production. It's called H2O, and we didn't have to reinvent the wheel with that. Fastly has already battle tested it and running it in all their edge servers for their CDN. So I'd say we're able to leverage all of that, like production ready libraries out there, and just focus on the search pieces, which is what we want Typesense to stand out on. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel across the board, we're able to focus on what is really needed for
Hmm.
Typesense as a product.
It's very interesting. I was wondering because I remember back in the days when Elasticsearch was promoted, they were saying, if I remember correctly, that they've selected Java because it's multi-architecture. It's easy to. One of the reasons was that you can and I wonder what's the is it difficult for C++ to compile to different targets, for example, or now it's a non-issue, for example.
That still exists. Like for example, right now, Typesense builds don't work on ARM machines because we have to make some small tweaks. So that problem still exists, and I don't think C++ set out to solve that as a problem. Whereas Java specifically, that was one of the design goals, is to make it cross-platform. It's a single binary that runs across platforms. But then the downside is they have the JVM, which does all that cross. The JVM is cross-compiled to different targets, and so that needs to be handled by some part of the stack. And I think in C++, my opinion at least, is that adding something like a runtime, like a JVM, just adds more complexity. You're just passing on the complexity to your end users, whereas instead of taking on the complexity of inside the program itself, and that's the trade-off. That does make life harder for developers of the program, because now they have to think about all the platforms to compile on. But I'd say, these days, developer experience is such a big component that you'd rather take on the burden of cross-compiling or making sure it's cross-platform yourself, rather than pushing it on to end users. And I mean, case in point is JVM is hard to deploy for end users and scale it and tweak it and all the hundreds of maybe thousands of parameters that the JVM has. So I'm happy with our choice of C++ at this point.
And I would say that I think C++ is a perfect choice for creating something the most performant, one of the most performant tools, because you almost touching it's the lowest level of abstraction.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, it's lower than that. You probably have to write some assembly.
Yeah.
So I think it's as good as it gets in terms of how low level you can program with C. And that's like I said before, that performance is something that we optimize Typesense for. And like all the indices are stored in memory because of that, and we need to manage the memory as close to the metal as possible. And I'd say like something like C++ allows us to do that efficiently or flexibly, I would say. And because efficiency is a function of how we program it, but the flexibility is what C++ gives us.
Before we talk about search, I wanted to ask you, because maybe some of the viewers would like to learn C++, and what would be, in your opinion, the best way to learn nowadays C++? How to get into this community? Is it difficult or?
I mean, I'd say any college textbook on C++ is pretty good. Again, the unfortunate thing is like there's no canonical updated for example, authors who keep like publishing content regularly about modern. I mean, or maybe I haven't looked, so I should apologize. Maybe you should just Google for it. I'm what I usually do is I just like Google for things as and when I need them, and I just keep going along. That said, I actually recently stumbled on a C++ podcast, which was interesting. I don't remember the name of it, but I think if you just Google for C++ CPP podcast, there was someone actively putting out fresh content about modern C++ practices. So that's something to stay up to date. And I think they also have a blog that's backing that. And I've noticed some encouragement from like the C++ subreddit. Like when we posted Typesense on there, they were pretty receptive and very encouraging of us. So maybe that's another community to join and see.
Right.
But in terms of tutorials, I mean, I don't have one resource. I just, Google is my Google and Stack Overflow.
So like a practical approach. You start with something and then try to figure like
engineering approach. Sure.
Because,
Yep, for sure. Oh yeah. Speaking of, so I'd say like pick a project that you want to work on, like or a product that you want to build, or a personal itch that you want to scratch, or even if it's as simple as, for example, you want to do something on the command line and you want to write a little CLI utility, like maybe you could use C++ to do that and see what it takes to build a simple CLI utility with C++
Exactly.
and start from there and figure out the things that you need, because at its core, C++ is pretty easy because you don't even have to use any object orientation. You can just start writing your main method and start writing things. You can make it as complicated as you need it to, but at the basic, it's you just start writing a few lines of hello world and it starts working out of the box. So and it's just a single compile command, and so it should be pretty easy to get started, I would say.
And let's maybe talk about search now. So how did you get into search? What was the motivation? Have you worked with some search engines? And you probably have, but how did you decide it? I mean, how did you start it from working with that into creating your own search engine?
Yeah, so I started with Solr way back in I think in 2010 maybe is when I first experienced search engines, and before that I was thinking the databases can do everything. Then I realized, oh, they can't do full text search, and then stumbled on Solr, and it was like, Solr is still around. Like you need to use like XML schemas to configure different things, and so that's where I started. And then Elasticsearch, I started hearing more and more about Elasticsearch over the years. And then at my day jobs, we started using Elasticsearch in production. We had like an internal admin panel where we needed to search through all of our users so that our customer support agents can quickly look up accounts. And at that time, Elasticsearch seemed like the only other alternative, and I didn't want to use Solr at that point. So we started using Elasticsearch. I mean, it seemed quite complicated to operate, but we were like, I mean, we have to do what needs to get done. Production, and would periodically run into issues with it, and like some things required tweaking the JVM, some things required tweaking Elasticsearch parameters, and we just kept up with it. And then AWS ironically launched their own hosted Elasticsearch version, and we were like, I mean, it's taking so much effort to run our own ES instances in EC2, and we were like, let's switch to that. We did that, and then recently I heard, after I left, the team switched back to self-hosted Elasticsearch. But anyway, so Elasticsearch was the primary thing that I knew, and I was always like running into issues, and teams would like spend a good amount of time fixing them, etc. And like that experience was like, left a little thing like, why is it so hard to build a search engine? So in parallel, my co-founder, Kishore, so he was also working on some search-related problems at his day job, and he was also running into like Elasticsearch. Like they also were trying to set up an Elasticsearch instance, and similar story, like frustration with trying to scale Elasticsearch and trying to get it to do what we want it to do, and just dealing with all the different features that Elasticsearch has, trying to find the exact little thing that you want. That was a constant source of frustration. So out of like pure frustration is how we were like, why is it so hard to like run a search engine? Like what would it take to build our own search engine? Like that's what that I would say maybe at that time a naive question started out, let's see what it would take to build our own search engine, and that's how Typesense started. It turns out over the years we have learned that building a search engine is a lot of hard work, because it took us almost 3 years to put out the first publicly release, and then another 2 years to for people to start actually saying, oh, I can run this in production and start getting excited about Typesense. So I'd say, had we known the amount of effort, and we're still like working on improving the search, and had we known the amount of effort it would take at that point, we may not have started working on Typesense. So,
but I'm glad you started, because it's amazing. It's an amazing project.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I'm glad we stuck with it. So many, I'd say, for us, being naive and just starting this out as an R&D project, we didn't really have any expectations. Like we weren't like, oh, we're going to compete with Elasticsearch and launch this awesome thing. Like that wasn't the goal at the time. We were like, let's just see if we build our own search engine, like how hard can it be? Like that's the question that started. So kind of an R&D research project, and then it grew from there. And we were like, oh, maybe this we can, people are running it in production now. Oh, maybe people would be willing to pay for it. And we tried an open core model, then we switched to a hosted model. So it's been a learning experience all along, throughout, and we're continuing to learn and iterate on the product as well.
I wanted to ask you about the necessary computer science concepts, because search in general there's like a lot of concepts, theoretical concepts you have to take into consideration. And I was wondering, was it how was it for you? Was it difficult, or going through that and trying implement certain things?
Yeah, it did take a little bit of learning curve, like reading research papers, etc. We did have, both my co-founder and I, so we met in our undergrad computer science. So we did computer science as well, and I did computer science for master's as well. So that background helped with that side a little bit. But I would say we did have to relearn a lot of things, because when you learn it in an academic setting, it's different from when you actually start working with it in real life. But I'd say at its core, the key data structures, like we use, for example, it's an inverted index, where each of your tokens or words, in the documents that you index, we store like which document IDs have that particular token. So it's a giant inverted index, and I'm simplifying it, of course. And then for typo tolerance, you use things like a trie, which helps you do like searches you typo tolerance, and then there's this thing called like the Levenstein edit distance to see how far a particular word is from a word that already exists in the document. So the trie helps you implement, or we've implemented the Levenstein distance on top of the trie. So at its core, like these are the fundamental data structures that are needed from a computer science perspective. And after that, it's been like, I would say, years and years of optimization and seeing, what small pieces work, what don't work. And, we've done like crazy things, like, if the data set size is like over this much, if the cardinality of a field is over this much, then use this approach, otherwise use this approach. So it's been a lot of like tweaking and learning with different types of data sets. And that's another thing that I would say has helped us significantly, is actually working with users and seeing what types of data sets that users are indexing with Typesense, and observing the behavior of Typesense with those data sets, and then tweaking them to make it work well with those types of data sets, I think has captured so much of so many different use cases. And we've been able to optimize Typesense for broad sets of data sets based on just what users are telling us. So that's been another valuable learning experience, is that it's not just about writing the code, it's also about then running that code against a whole plethora of real world use cases.
Having this feedback loop.
Exactly. And that I would say is another important thing that has significantly helped us in like maturing Typesense as a product. And like the fact that, in Typesense Cloud, that's a big advantage that we get, is we're able to observe Typesense being used across all these different data sets, and
you can adapt and tweak.
We can adapt, and then users are, especially when users give us permission to access the data sets that they're putting on Typesense Cloud, it gives us first-hand experience into how the engine is performing on these different data sets, and that all those improvements make it back into the open source version. And so it's a nice little feedback loop that we have that I'd say has helped accelerate how fast we're able to optimize Typesense.
I must say that that's an excellent approach. It's a very practical and very engineering spirit. And yeah, I think. So before we continue, we have a question from the chat. Maybe we could answer that. So, are you using any library for Levenstein distance algorithm, or did you write your own implementation?
We wrote our own implementation.
Okay, awesome. So I was wondering, because my first introduction to Typesense, I don't like this word blown away, but I really was blown away by Typesense the first time I tried it. I had some like a significant experience with Elasticsearch, and I shared your like a perspective on that. But I don't want to be negative about Elasticsearch, because I mean the team is probably doing their best trying to
Yep,
build
yep.
an amazing product, and it's really is amazing. But Typesense, when I first approached it, it was very friendly. Like everything worked, and it was very optimized for my happiness. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. Was this like a design from the get-go to be like that, to get very to be very friendly, or very oriented for happiness of programmers and people using it?
Yep, for sure. I mean, that's an explicit stated goal, I would say, for Typesense, because uh, because of how Typesense was born, right? Like we, out of personal frustration with the complexity with other search engines, is what led us to say, can we build a simpler, easier to use search engine? So it's definitely one of the things that definitely a goal that we constantly pay attention to. Like with every new feature we add, we make sure that we set good defaults
Mm-hmm.
for the for a search parameter, for example, and like sometimes we spent like a week trying to going back and forth trying to decide
Yeah.
what the best parameter. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
how much attention we pay to keeping things as simple as possible. That's one thing. The other thing is we also focus on making sure it's the interface into Typesense is modern and as simple to use versus having like a complex DSL to even communicate with the API.
Yeah,
Like we
that you have to
wanted
learn.
to exactly. Like if you're looking at an API call, if you're looking at, for example, a curl command or a client library call, making a call into Typesense, we wanted all the parameter naming even to be as obvious as possible. I'd say probably have some more work to do there, but we try and keep it as simple as possible. So that, okay, if it says query by, and like those are the fields it's querying by.
Yeah.
Like if you say highlight fields, like that's the fields that you want the highlights to be on. Like we try to keep all the parameter names as intuitive as possible as well. The other thing I would say is now, and like you mentioned, there's nothing bad about Elasticsearch in that, like, I'd say Typesense, we're not trying to like say, oh, like we're trying to compete with Elasticsearch and we're going to take over Elasticsearch's market. Like that's not what we're trying to do at all. Like I'd say Elasticsearch is a product that's versatile and like built for a whole bunch of different use cases. Like, they do site and app search, they do log search, they do security incident monitoring. Like you can do a whole bunch of things with Elasticsearch. And that's a good thing in that for teams that want like as flexible as possible, like search and aggregation and analytics platform, like Elasticsearch offers all of that under one roof. But what we're trying to say is that that's what also makes Elasticsearch complex, and you might not need all those features that Elasticsearch offers. And
Yeah.
I'd say not every team needs all those complex features, and that's what we're saying. Okay, for teams that don't need all of these complex features, then there's Typesense, where we're only focusing on app and site search, and we want to make that as simple as possible and remove everything that makes Elasticsearch complex. So we've had to say no to a couple of Elasticsearch features that might have made Typesense complex, but it's an opinionated subset of
Mm-hmm.
search features that are just specific for building search as you type, typo tolerant searching and browsing experiences. I would say so. I look at the world as there's Elasticsearch, which is you could do anything under the sun with it as it relates to search, search analytics, log monitoring, etc. And then there's Typesense, which does search and app search really well and in a slightly opinionated way. And it works out of the box, and it has same defaults, and we prioritize developer experience, has a REST API, etc. So
It's a battery included solution. We could say that it's a battery included solution that.
Yep. And yep. So we wanted to work out of the box, and that's
Yeah.
something that we focus on, so that you don't have to tweak too many parameters to get it to do what you want. So I'd say for 80% of the cases, it works so far. From what I've seen, it just works out of the box. For some folks who need like more fine tweaking around like typo tolerance and things like that, then we have like these knobs for people to turn.
And another thing I noticed when I was playing with Typesense is that it's very easy to set up and like deploy even. Like it's just a single binary. And it seems that this operational cost, like a maintaining, it also seem much simpler compared to something like Elasticsearch, where you have to think about different setups and configuration of maybe machines and stuff.
Yep. That's again from personal experience as well, trying to deploy Elasticsearch clusters, where I think you have like different roles for different nodes that you add, etc. And so we wanted Typesense to not just be easy to integrate with, but also easy to run in production. So like the single, that's why we took the approach of a single binary. Like we didn't even want people to worry about putting Typesense behind an Nginx server, for example, which is why we baked in an HTTP server like H2O inside of the Typesense binary. And we want it to be as simple as, here's a binary, you start running it with a bunch of parameters to configure it. And then if you wanted to run it in high availability, you just use the same binary, point it to the IP address of this other binary, and then it magically, you set up 3 of those, and it uses RAF to magically start syncing the data between these two. So we optimize for low operational overhead, where once it's up and running, it just scales out of the box without any more fine tuning. So, for example, I've been able to get as high as, I think in one particular data set, as high as like 2 requests per second on like a I think it was a 3 node 2 vCPU per node cluster with just 512 MB RAM. This particular data set. And I was like pretty surprised that we would go to like 2,000 requests per second. So without any additional tweaking, like just install Typesense on 3 nodes and started it, indexed the data, and started running the benchmarks. So that's the type of out-of-boxness that we try to optimize for. Now, of course, there might be like in different use cases, you might have to tweak things like at the OS level, like your TCP backlog or your quest queue and your window size and things like that. But we're hoping that in majority of the case, like things like that are not needed. It's just you install the binary, run it, and you set it and forget it, and HA takes care of like syncing the data between the different nodes.
I really like this open source aspect, but at the same time, we should mention that you also have a cloud offering, right? So you have all this knowledge and this experience with running those instances, and you can even improve that. So if someone it's not like sure about hosting it themselves, they can rely on the cloud solution.
Yep. Yeah. So one interesting thing that I'm starting to see is that it's not just like there are teams where they just don't want to deal with servers, like however simple or easy it is. Just the fact of running VMs is a non-starter for many teams, and that's a good chunk of people who like hosted services and managed services, and that's they use Typesense Cloud. And of course, with Typesense Cloud, because you're working directly with the authors, like when you run into any potential issues, it's easier to debug because we have like first-hand visibility into what's happening into the stack. There's more like tooling that we've built to get to quickly diagnose and fix any issues. But like I was saying in the beginning, one thing, so the way we started working on Typesense Cloud is not, initially we were like, we didn't want to go down the path of offering a hosted version. So we actually had, so it's an open source project, but we knew we wanted to work on it full time. So we needed to find a monetization model to support ourselves. And so initially we started out with saying, okay, some features are like open core, where we say these are premium features and you pay for them and you get them. But what we realized over time quickly is that those features were not, the premium features were not being used by as many people. So those also weren't the most stable compared to the other open source features. And we realized that, we actually want people to be using all the features and giving us feedback and for us to mature the product, first as a top priority. So at one point we were like, let's just open source everything, and we did away with the premium version. And going forward, we were like, we're just going to open source everything because that's the best way to get everyone to use feature sets and give us feedback. And then what coincidentally happened was people were starting to ask us, saying, hey, can you also run this for us? Like, we don't want to manage service at all. And we were like, okay, that's our monetization model right there. And
That's pretty cool.
we're like happy to do it. And then some self-hosted folks also wanted, just for debugging maybe issues that they're running into in their own self-hosted instances. And they were like, hey, can you like give us some guarantees that you will respond, like that you won't ghost us, And we were like, okay, let's do a support offering, and that's another monetization offering. And then and another user was like, hey, can I sponsor you on GitHub? Like, I'd love to support your open source work. And like, sure. So I'd say so those are 3 ways we monetize today, and all of those things kind of organically grew based on what people using Typesense were giving us feedback. So, and the thing that I like is all of these kind of feedback into the open source ecosystem, like I was saying, where Typesense Cloud users giving us feedback about how it's working with their data sets and us having first-hand visibility, Typesense support, paid support users giving us feedback, the open source users giving us feedback on GitHub issues as they self-post. Like, all of that makes its way back into the fully open source Typesense core. And I'd say that has, I really love seeing, and I've mentioned this a couple of times now, but I really love seeing that feedback loop working out. And my goal is to like help democratize access to this search technology, and make it as widely usable as possible, and cost to not be an issue for teams across the board. And to that end, being able to channel all of that back into the open source product has been, like, I would say, very satisfying to watch and fulfilling for me.
We should also mention that your company is bootstrapped, right? You are bootstrapping, and that's also pretty like not popular way of running a business these days. And I was wondering the reasons and what your perspective on that.
Yeah, so there are a couple of reasons. So I've worked at VC-backed companies for the last 10 years or so, 10, 11 years or so. And I've seen what running a VC-backed company means. And it's, usually in like 5 to 7 years, you need to have like an exit plan in mind of, either you're going public, or you have some sort of liquidity event, you get acquired, or maybe these days, I mean, people are raising like, multiple rounds of funding, like Series F and H and things like that. So, whereas to me, something like Typesense, where the core technology needs a lot of time to like marinate and mature and like bake, for it to reach a point where so that takes time. And my belief is that, maybe, so it's already taken us now 6 years, I think, 6 years now to get Typesense to what it is today. And I wouldn't be surprised if it continues to take us, another 5-6 years for us to continue adding features and getting feedback from users. So I'd rather not rush that piece of making sure the foundations of Typesense are as strong as possible, because I'd love for Typesense to be around in like 50, 60 years from now, and for it to like continue taking its life of its own. And I feel like rushing through that too soon, which is what typically comes with when you raise venture capital. I'd love for us to have longer timeframes in mind. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, I've also seen many venture-backed companies, especially in like the enterprise SaaS space, take VC funding and then eventually make their way up market to the enterprise, to other enterprise companies, and chase after like $1 million deals, and suddenly start raising their prices and like pricing out the vast majority of their existing user base. And I'd hate for Typesense to go down that path as well. And because, like I said, we want to make this technology as accessible as possible to as wide a population as we can. And I'd love it if we can get to a stage where, if people think like today, if people think relational databases, it's MySQL or Postgres. I'd love to get to a stage where if people think search, they think Typesense and it's part of the
Typesense,
local
yeah.
developer stack. And but today, if you look at something like Elasticsearch, like if you look at their landing page, they've already gone like very enterprise, and it's not as accessible as it used to be, many years ago. And I'd hate for that to happen with Typesense as well. So we want to stay razor focused on one thing and do that really well over long periods of time, and also make it as accessible to as wide an audience as possible. So to do all of that, to me, it felt like at least raising venture capital at that, so far has not might not have contributed towards what our current goals. But of course, the trade-off there is so our current plan is to be able to scale the company and the product with revenue that we're making from customers with Typesense Cloud or GitHub sponsors or the support packages, and use that because today, like, one of the things that incredibly motivates me is waking up every day and just looking at what are my users telling me, and that's the top and only priority I have. Like that, I'd love to be able to do that over long periods of time. So there's that aspect. Now, of course, we've probably had like 24 VC firms reach out to us in the last 2 years, and it definitely feels nice to be courted. But I've kept saying it's not yet, like we're not yet ready to take on funding. The downsides to that is that we also can't like hire a team of like 10 engineers and move at like blazing fast speeds. We have to like be methodical about focusing on the topmost priority and deprioritize things. So it's a trade-off, and I'm happy with the trade-off that we're making. In fact, I would say because we're such a small team right now, that has actually helped us move faster. Because in larger teams, there's communication overhead, and you need to start planning things and alignment and all of that. And like today, it's a very easy conversation to reprioritize something and get it going. And we keep reprioritizing based on what users are telling us. So that process is so easy. Like we don't plan even 2 months ahead, and that's mainly because we know that within those 2 months, someone can give us some feedback that could like we might start working on something else that's needed for.
You have freedom to decide.
So that freedom is like empowering and I'd say liberating to be able to do that. So I'd say we're really happy working on Typesense right now, and I'm not looking to raise funds anytime in the near future, but let's see. That's my current.
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah, that's pretty interesting and unique approach, and I think many people are curious about that. So let's maybe talk about Typesense. What are your favorite features in Typesense? Maybe 3 or 4. If someone is new to Typesense, what would be the features that this person could use or you find useful?
Yeah, the thing that comes out of the box with Typesense, which I think most users will find useful, is typo tolerance. Like by default, you can do up to 1 or 2 typos, and it just handles that. Over that, it becomes a little confusing if we do typo tolerance, which is why we capped it at 2 characters. So that's of course comes out of the box, no tweaking needed. And then one interesting use case. So of course, Typesense is a full text search engine, so you can build your search bar and run that with Typesense. But one interesting use case that many e-commerce users are using Typesense for is not just the search bar, but also to render the product grid on like category pages. So, for example, on like say a men's shirts page where it lists all the different products, that grid can actually be rendered by Typesense. Where if you think about it, in a results page, you still have a grid and you have a list of filters to refine the results and drill down into the exact product you're looking for. That's a similar experience that you have on the category page as well, except that your query in this case is just a wildcard query. You're saying, get me all products, but with these filters matching where category equals men's shirts. And then the user can add additional filters like maybe color equals blue or size equals M or things like that. So that's a very interesting use case for Typesense. I like to call it a browsing experience, not just a searching experience. And that's something that's been interesting use case that I've discovered. Another use case I've seen is some people are just using Typesense to render, to just store JSON objects and use it as a JSON store. In addition to search, like, and again, taking the e-commerce example, once you click on a product in a category page and go to the product details page where only that product is shown, that information on that page, they're also fetching that from Typesense.
Interesting.
So it's almost like they're using it as a caching layer instead of hitting the database, which maybe is a little bit more expensive. And because they already have an integration with Typesense, they're like, just, the data already exists there. So they're just making API calls to Typesense to fetch that data by ID, which I think is an interesting use case. And then, of course, geo-search, that's a feature that we added recently. If you want to get places that are closest to a given geolocation within a given radius, that's another thing. And that's the live coding session that I did last week as well. Let's see, the other things, of course, faceting is a usual thing that people would find use for, where it just counts, once you have the results, it counts the number of records that have a particular value for a field. So here's how many red shirts are there, here's how many blue shirts are there, and so that you can display that count in filters.
And whenever you change, it happens instantly, right?
That's correct. Of course, yes. Yes, that's a key feature. So we optimize for search as you type experiences, meaning that typically we try to optimize for less than 50 milliseconds. Of course, it varies depending on the size of your data set. Like, for example, I indexed like a 32 million songs data set, and that sometimes takes up to like 200 milliseconds for some search queries. So, but still, that's 32 million records, and 200 milliseconds is still fast. So search as you type is what we've optimized for. So typically before search as you type a keyword and then you press enter and then you get results, or you type a bunch of words and then you wait, even if it's like 500 milliseconds, you wait a little bit and then it starts showing you results. What we've optimized for is every key press will like start returning results right away. And I think the threshold is about 250 milliseconds, if I remember correctly, based on some UX studies that people have done, is that anything under 250 milliseconds is what the human mind perceives as being instantaneous, and anything over that, you start seeing slowdowns, or you start perceiving the slowdowns. And so that's something that we've optimized for, is that every key press, if you start showing results in like less than 250 milliseconds, users get the impression that, oh, the engine is fast and it's not much more cognitive overhead for me to explore the data set as I'd like. So I've actually seen cases where the number of search queries or the number of products that users explore once you add a search as you type experience increases because people are more empowered to like get different types of search results. So that, of course, in an e-commerce context, then leads to more products being viewed, leads to more conversion rate, and then eventually more revenue. And then in the case of, for example, a knowledge-based search, that's people searching for help articles, like it reduces the number of tickets into support because people are able to find more types of articles. Maybe they had some question at the back of their head that they didn't even thought to ask, but then this keyword kind of returns that. So it has a whole bunch of cases to expose more results to users and then reduce the amount of human help that they might have otherwise helped, which improves efficiency of operating the business.
I think the e-commerce context is pretty interesting because it really translates to something you can measure, that if people can find something fast, it's probable that they will buy this thing and they can like explore your catalog. So it's sometimes funny to see search on e-commerce that it's not instant, that it's that doesn't happen as you type, and you have to press this enter or wait a longer moment to see what you want to buy.
Yeah. Once you get used to it, I mean, it's hard to go back, I'd say.
Exactly. It's hard to get back from this experience. I wanted to ask maybe the last question, because we are almost over time. What's the future for search and for Typesense? What's the next step you would like to do, or maybe a feature you're going to add?
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest features that we're working on right now are, which hopefully in a couple of weeks it should be out, is more around trying to identify keywords that exist in the search that are already uh, structured in some way in your document. So for example, if you search for red Nike shoes, uh, today what we do is we take red Nike shoes and search it across your, let's say you have a list of products, and we search it across all the fields that you've mentioned for all the keywords. But imagine in a world where we're able to take just the word red and search it only against the color field, and take the word Nike and search it only against the brand field, and the shoes and search that only against the category field. So what we're working on right now is the ability to break out search queries automatically, uh, where you can configure it so that it gets, each field will automatically get searched against only that particular field within the document. So that vastly improves relevance from what we've seen in some data sets, especially in e-commerce. So, so that in that particular, let's say category wasn't a field in the example, right? So in the document. So instead, if you say it's red Nike shoes, and then red will match against color, and then we'll apply that as a filter automatically. Nike will apply as a brand filter, and then we can search for just shoes among these filters, and that vastly increases relevance. Because if you had a document which said in the description, maybe it said something like, "Oh, this I don't know, black blazer goes well with red Nike shoes," in the description. Previously, those records would have showed up as well, because, well, red Nike shoes exists in the description of that, of another product. So that's the downside with doing pure text-based search, and we're hoping that this feature solves for that, where it's a little bit more structured search as well. So that's one thing I'm really excited about. When the other thing I'm also excited about is, like, we're constantly trying to optimize performance. And after the most recent release, some of our users shared some interesting data sets. With those, we've actually been able to improve the update performance by almost like 20 to 30% faster. Like earlier, it used to take slower than that to update documents once you index them the first time. So we've optimized that. And as a nice side benefit, the search response times, just yesterday I was working with a user for their particular data set. The search response times went from like 300 milliseconds to like 20 milliseconds for their particular data set. So the search response times are significantly improving in the coming release. The other thing is memory consumption has also gone down by about 40% in the upcoming release. So performance improvements in general, I'm super excited by, because the more performant it is, the lesser resources that are needed to run Typesense with more traffic. So and it makes it even more scalable. So I'm super excited about that. Now, looking way farther into the future, not necessarily about Typesense, but something that I'm keeping an eye on, and people are slowly starting to mention in like the GitHub issues, are this thing called vector search, where, for example, if we wanted to find product X that's similar to this other product, like similarity queries, that's something that we're starting to think about. And there are some pure vector-based search engines that are coming out these days, which is interesting. The other, by the way, all of these are like super far out. Not that we may or may not tackle these, but another interesting thing I've seen, like open source, like neural network-based search coming out as well, which is an interesting development. But yeah. Sorry.
Do you think you will add that as a core feature or more like a plugin?
At this point, we're not even thinking about adding any AI ML type features, mainly because I think, well, bandwidth is definitely a concern, but also I'm trying to see how this field evolves, because some feedback that I've gotten, especially with like neural-based search engines, is that it's way too magical for people to get it to reliably return the results that they need. And there are use cases where you still need structured search, and that's what I like to call Typesense. Is that like, okay, I want to search in this particular field, and I want to boost this by this particular value among all these other fields. Like those types of very well-defined structured queries are something that's very hard to do in a neural network search. And that's where I think something like Typesense, which is a structured search engine, like Typesense, Elasticsearch, Algolia, structured search engines. There's always going to be use cases for that. So we're still thinking whether we want to go down that path or not. But I'd say it's way the
keeping an eye on this.
Yep.
We are over time, but maybe we have just some. If that's okay for you, Jason, if there's some questions from the audience, I would like to give a chance to someone. If there's a question, maybe we can take one. And if there is not, maybe we could stop here. I would love to continue because there's so much thing. Maybe we'll have a chance to repeat that and to go into some specific things later in the future.
Yep. Yeah, I'd love to do that. This didn't feel like an hour to me. Maybe I was.
Yeah, exactly. This went by very fast. There's so many interesting things I learned today, and I'm even more excited about Typesense now. I was pretty excited before we talked. So, Jason, thank you very much for your time for doing this interview. So one last maybe question: if someone wants to follow development of Typesense, what's the best? Is it GitHub the best way to follow what happens?
Yep. So GitHub, if you sign up for, if you watch the repository, and you can sign up for like release notifications, so new releases. We also started writing a blog, just haven't found time to write more articles. But there's a mailing list there as well if you want to join that. And we have a Slack community as well. The link to it is in our GitHub repo, just in one of the badges. We answer questions there, announce interesting things, resources, etc. Oh, of course, there's our Twitter account that we do release announcements and any interesting events that come up. So these are some ways to keep in touch.
And we can also sponsor a Typesense on GitHub, right?
Yes. Yep. On GitHub sponsors, so we have different sponsorship tiers, both one-time or monthly recurring as well. And we have some nice little benefits for sponsoring as well, like prioritization for issues that you open, or just shout out on Twitter for your project or yourself, or etc. So please go check it out. We'd be delighted. If we're looking for, like, let's say, partners to come join us in this journey as we build Typesense, and I'd say our user community is a big part of that journey, because that's how we've been able to mature Typesense this far, like I was mentioning. So I'd love to, interact with as many folks as possible, and see. And that's something that's also super motivating for me, is to just hear how Typesense is being used in different contexts and the different projects, and the videos that you created, Zeiss, like just seeing people use Typesense and produce these resources for Typesense and building this community. It's incredibly motivating for me to just watch that happen. So
I plan to do a few other videos, so I hope it will help.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks again for being here, Jason. It was an excellent talk, and good luck with everything, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk in the future.
Yep, thank you for having me. This was fun. Yep, looking forward to future sessions as well.
See ya.
All right, see ya.